and they have been on the attack. And in this particular situation, there's somebody that's coming up against them, trying to put them out. So pretty interesting chapter, and a lot of good things that we can learn from it. So before we go any further, I'd like for Keith Davis, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Most kind, gracious, loving Heavenly Father, come thanking you for this opportunity that we have to gather here together to study from your word. We pray, Father, you will be with David as he breaks the bread of life unto us. We pray, Father, we will have a total revelation. He will present a lesson that we can all put on our hearts and in our minds and be better servants for it. We're thankful for your Son, Jesus, the love that he showed you going to the cross and dying for us. In his name we pray.
Yeah. All right, so let's start out by looking at the first four verses here. It says, "Now it came to pass when Adonizek, king of Jerusalem, had heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and her king. So he had done to Ai and her king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, that they feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, as one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all the men thereof were mighty. Now Adonizek, king of Jerusalem, sent unto Horham, king of Hebron, unto Param, king of Jarmuth, unto Jephthah, king of Lachish, and Debar, king of Eglon, saying, Come unto me and help me, that we may smite Gibeon, for it hath made peace with Joshua and with the children of Israel." So we see here that the report that Joshua had taken Ai and pretty much laid it to ruins, just like they did the town or the city of Jericho. And they're starting to get a little bit panicking here. And as the Israelites move closer to Jerusalem, the king there is starting to see what's going on. So Adonizek decides that he better do something if he's going to preserve his kingdom. And if you look at this on a map, Gebron is getting really close to Jerusalem. The children of Israel are kind of working their way kind of from the north down into the south, and they're starting to get pretty close to Jerusalem. So what they're trying to do here is he's trying to put together a coalition of all of the Canaanites to go and battle the children of Israel. Now, we talked about before the size of the army that the children of Israel had, was about 4 divisions in modern time. So that's a pretty formidable force, and it would be very difficult for them in Jerusalem to muster a force that big. So he's basically putting together here a coalition from the towns and cities that are around Jerusalem. Now, I think it's pretty obvious from the text that Adonizek is the one who's initiating this alliance that's being put together. It's interesting to note that there's a historical document. It's actually a bunch of tablets, and it's called the Amarna Letters, and it actually talks about the political activities that was going on in this time. And there's one of the tablets that actually talks about this particular event here, and in the letters here, it doesn't refer to the children of Israel directly as Hebrews, but it refers to them as something called a Hebra, Habiru. And this is a term that was used back then that basically means outsiders, outlaws, rebels, raiders, mercenaries, something along that line. So these writings, we're talking about the consternation that these other cities had for the children of Israel, but also it talks about that they're gobbling up all the land, and it's becoming a problem for those people. It's kind of interesting to note that as history has gone on, the historians have kind of linked the Hebrews and the Habra as the same, but it's actually not, because the Hebrews is an ethnic group, and this Habra or whatever is a social category, not necessarily an ethnic group, but it's so intertwined, and it fits in so well that it's got to actually be, it's actually going to be talking about that. So basically here, they get all the kings together, and they come up with a common plan of attack against the city of Gibeon, where the children of Israel are holding the city. And what they're trying to basically put together is they're trying to put together a siege onto the town. But when the battle comes forth, it's not going to be a siege. It's going to be a classic battle between two forces, pretty much out in the open. Now, Jerusalem, is one of the older cities that's there in that area at the time, and originally it was called Salem at the time of Abraham. We can read that in Genesis 14 and 18. But the proper name that we see with Jerusalem actually starts to be called Jerusalem here in Joshua, when we start seeing Jerusalem change, or the name change from Salem to Jerusalem. And according to the scholars, this is the first time that Jerusalem was ever called Jerusalem in the scriptures. So on the division of the land, if you looked to see where all of this was, the area that we're talking about here is in the tribe of Benjamin, but it's also right on the border of the tribe of Judah. And this area has been conquered and burned several times throughout history. So it was going to be destroyed. It's been rebuilt several times, and things along that line. There's a lot of information out there about all of these different kings and all of these different towns. Hebron was a city that was situated in the mountains southward of Jerusalem, and from it was about 30 miles in distance from Jerusalem, and this was in the area that would be occupied by the tribe of Judah. Hebron was a town of Arabia, and the Amalekites lived there. We can read about this in Genesis and also in Joshua. And it was about 22 Roman miles south of Jerusalem, and it was in a deep and narrow valley up on the mountain of Judah, and it was a pretty significant town or city in the antiquity back then. Today it's called Caudill, Khalia, and the meaning of Hebron actually means the friend of God. And of course, we've talked about this town before when we were talking about some of the things that Abraham did. The ruins there actually have an ancient heathen temple that you can still see quite a bit of the ruins now. Now Piram was the king of Jarmuth, this was there were actually two cities of that particular name. One belonged in the area of the tribe of Issachar, and we'll talk about that in Joshua 21 and 29. And the other one that was mentioned fell into the tribe of Judah. And it's supposed to have been the one that we're talking about here, about 18 miles from Jerusalem. And then Jarmuth is in the lowlands of Judea, or of Judah. And according to the historians, it was a village that was on a lofty hill, and there are still some remains of it the walls and some of the cisterns that they had. And if you go over there, you could you could see that. Now it has a different name now. It's called Tel Alamoth is the Arab name for it now. Joppa, the king of Lachish. This city was talked about in the scriptures in 2 Kings 14 and 19, and it was besieged by a fellow named Shabba-Nabra, and we can read about this in 2 Kings chapter 18. And then later on, it was captured by and besieged by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar. And there's some writings about that in the Bible also. Lachish was in the lowlands of Judea, and it was fortified by Rehoboam. We can read about this in 2 Chronicles 19 and 11. And it was besieged by Nebuchadnezzar, which we can also read about in 2 Kings 18, and we just mentioned before. They don't have a lot of they don't know exactly where this one is at, because they don't have real good archaeology information about this one. Dabra, the king of Eglon, this is where the city is situated, is very uncertain now, and it's mentioned in the 15th chapter, and it fell in the area of the tribe of Judah. And Eglon was in the lowlands of Judah, and they believe that it's there's a set of ruins called Jalon, and there's some speculation that is maybe where the ruins and where this city actually was, and it's about 3/4 of an hour east of Jerusalem. So there's a lot of stuff that's written about this, but basically we're talking about a coalition of people about 20 miles, about a 20-mile radius that they're trying to get together, and you'll see most of them are to the south, where they're going to have to attack to the north. Any comments about those verses? All right, let's look at verse 5. Therefore, the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, the king of Eglon, gathered themselves together and went up, and they all their host, and encamped before Gibron, and made war against it. So we see here that these 5 kings marched with their armies. They went north, and they were getting ready to besiege the town of Gibron. Now, the king of Jerusalem headed the expedition, and really it was his town, Jerusalem, or his city that he was wanting to protect, and he was probably the one that was most fearful of the Israelites. So we see here that he was successful in getting this coalition together, and that it was a successful enough coalition that each individual king led their individual armies. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 6. And the men of Gibron sent unto Joshua unto the camp of Gilead, saying, Slack not thy hand from thy servants. Come to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites that dwell in the mountains are gathered against us. So the people there at Gibron, they basically surrendered. And they were looking for the children of Israel to protect them from the Amorites who were wanting to besiege the city and take it back so that they would have some type of control over the area. Now here the writer uses the name Amorites, and it's generally the Canaanites who were living in all of this different area. You can kind of interchange the Amorites and the Canaanites in a lot of the writings here, and of course also living in this area were the Jebusites who occupied the area also. So the Amorites who dwelled in the mountains were the strongest of all the Canaanites. So in this coalition they went out and they found the best fighters that they could, and this is really the first time that Israel had gone into a battle against an alliance of city-states. every time before it was one individual city, but here they're going against a coalition of city-states. Comments about that verse?
Gibeon, of course, is what we looked at last week in the 9th chapter.
Mm-hmm.
That's the group that
They made a treaty.
Yeah, made a treaty with.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of intermingled even now.
Right. And you know, the way I kind of read it, you know, last week, they surrendered everything. They didn't have an army to protect themselves.
I love that verse 2 talks about that those kings were fearful of Gibeon. It says that they were greater than Ai, and they all their men were mighty.
Yeah. All right, let's look at verse 7. So Joshua ascended from Gilead, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. So, you know, he's going in there to do this. So we have to understand that he got his warriors together. But it's interesting to note that how some of the scholars took a look at this. The impression that some of the scholars have, and it makes perfect sense based on the situation, is that, you know, Joshua did not take his entire army to do battle here. And I think there was, you know, probably several reasons for it. Number one, he had about 5,000 fighting men, which is, you know, that we've talked about before. But he didn't necessarily take all of them because he had to go back and he had to protect the area that you know, the women and the children and all the oxen and cattle and all that kind of stuff. So he probably had to leave a group back to protect his rear, because the people were coming in from his rear. And also, as we read through here, Joshua was going to be very confident in this battle. And we're going to see here a series of verses where there's basically a conversation between Joshua and God. And, you know, God has laid out and told him that, you know, he's going to deliver this land. So it's not going to be quite as critical, the size of force that he takes against these people, because God has already told him that he's going to win the battle. So it would kind of be interesting to know exactly how many people that he took. But the indication and the way that it was written in the original text kind of indicates that he did not take his entire force. But it also indicates here, it talks about the mighty men of valor. This was his handpicked. This was his best fighters. This was his special forces type people. And he had them there, and they were the absolute best fighters. They were the strongest. They had the most courage, and they were the most effective that you could use in battle. So he had his regular troops, but he also had his special forces to go up and do this particular battle. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 8. And the Lord said unto Joshua, Fear them not, for I have delivered them into thine hand. There shall not be a man of them stand before thee. So here we see in verse 8 that God reassures Joshua that he's going to be victorious. And when God says that something's going to happen, Joshua has such faith in the things that the Lord says that, you know, he takes it to heart, and he knows that if he does the things the right way, that everything is going to come out right. So the Lord basically renews his assurance that he's going to be in there, and he's going to help in this particular war that Joshua was about to fight. And this is a little bit different war than he was fighting the last time. So, you know, there's a little bit more different tactics and strategy, but that Joshua is going to have to deal with. But he knows that God is going to be on his side in this battle. And, you know, when you know you're going to win, it kind of takes some of the pressure off of you as the leader, knowing that, you know, that God is on your side, and the proof that they have had that, you know, when God was on their side, nothing was going to be against them. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 9. Joshua therefore came into them suddenly and went up from Gilead at night. So basically, he's going to move into position at night so that he's going to be ready to attack it at first light in the morning. And also we see here, starting here kind of with verse 9, there's a lot of activity between Joshua and God, and God is kind of helping him out here a little bit with with the strategy and the way that the battle is going to come about. So God wanted to, or the writer wanted to impress the fact that God and the men, they were laboring together in this endeavor here. It was a joint effort between God and the children of Israel. So Joshua is going to try to come up suddenly. He's going to march his whole army at night up to the battleground, and it's obviously that he accomplished this distance at night, which was probably about 15 miles. Is the distance that he had to move his army, and moving a group that big in the middle of the night to try to do a surprise attack. That's a pretty good feat. Comments about that verse? Right, but I think that there was probably a little bit of a setback there at Ai, and he lost a little bit of even though he had to go back the second time and he won, there's still maybe that doubt in his mind but it also I think reinforced the fact that he better do what he was told to do on there. All right, let's look at verse 10. And the Lord discomforted them before Israel and slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and chased them along the way that goeth up to Bethhoron, and smote them at Azekah and unto Makkelah. So basically, the multitudes of this coalition, they fell at the onset of this battle, and they were defeated, and they started to flee. So the Israelites were going to pursue them, which that's a small thing there, but they were doing what God told them to do, was to pursue them and do not stop until they have been completely annihilated. So it kind of looks like that maybe this group split up a little bit and kind of went in a couple different directions, but whatever they did, the children of Israel were pursuing them. And if you look back in military history, the different times that the army that was winning the battle did not pursue the defeated people, and it eventually came back and caused problems for them later. And the two that immediately comes to mind is in the Civil War. The first Battle of Bull Run, where the Confederates just completely routed the Union Army, but yet they didn't pursue them into Washington, where they could have wiped out Washington and won the war. And the second one was Gettysburg, where Meade didn't pursue Lee back into Virginia, and had an opportunity there probably to end the war right then. But in both cases, it gave the defeated army an opportunity to reorganize and come back and attack again. In this situation right here, Joshua is going to eliminate the problem so that they're not going to come back and attack again. And that's the point of pursuing them in the manner that he did. And as we go on, we're going to see that God played a very important part in making sure that the Amorites were completely defeated. Any other questions or comments about verse 10? Let's look at verse 11. And it came to pass as they fled from before Israel and were going down to the town of Bothram, that the Lord cast down great stones from heaven upon them unto the Asgah, and they died. They were more which died with hailstones than they whom the children of Israel slew with the sword. So this is a pretty interesting verse. God is actually interdicting into this particular battle. So his strategy basically is, we're going to attack them early in the morning with a surprise attack that probably caught the Amorites off guard. And this is something that that has happened before. We can read about this in Exodus 23 and 27. It says, I will send my fear before thee, and will destroy all the people to whom thou shalt come, and I will make all thine enemies turn their backs unto thee. So, God understood the importance of getting the enemy on the run. So Israel was able, because they attacked early and because it was kind of a surprise attack, they were able to gain the early advantage. And as a result of that, the Amorites started to flee, and the children of Israel were going to pursue them for several miles. Now, it's interesting to note here that when God intervened here with this hailstorm, that it actually killed more people than the Israelites did on the battlefield. And it's kind of hard to kill somebody with a sword or a spear or whatever when they're running away from you. So God just kind of and almost like put up a wall to pretty much hold them up. Now, this is not an unusual situation where hail had been used before as a weapon against an enemy. We could read in Exodus 9 and 24, it says, so there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as were none like it in all the land of Egypt, since it became a nation. So this hailstorm, killed a whole lot of the enemies, but we also see here that it didn't kill any of God's people, because God was protecting his protection. So by this, the Amorites and the Israelites realized that this victory was coming about because of the intervention of God, and not simply because of the power of the army of Israel. God was intervening here and was making his presence very well known. And the word's going to get around with the Canaanites, but it also reinforces the fact to the children of Israel that God was on their side, and that God was playing a very important part of in the battle. Now, we really don't know exactly what the size of these hailstones were, but we do know that they were large stones that he sent flying through the air. And if you think about it, say they were the size of a golf ball, or say that they were the size of a baseball, coming down out of the sky, hitting you on the head, that would probably hurt just a little bit if it didn't kill you. And I have seen in my lifetime a couple small hailstorms, and there was no way to get around the hail when it was falling. So I'm sure here that there was no way in this shire of stones that the enemy was going to be able to get away from them, and it slew a pretty good number of the people. So this phenomenon here pretty much resembled the hailstorm that's talked about in Exodus, the 9th chapter and verse 24, against the Egyptians, and we see that this was the power of God, that he made this happen at the proper time to get the proper effect, not only on the Canaanites, but also for the children of Israel to see firsthand the power that God had. Comments about that? One other thing I want to kind of mention here that, and this was, I don't remember which one of the scholars I was reading after, but yeah, he made the comment that in the eyes of the Canaanites, this was a very significant event, not only because it killed a lot of people, but Baal, which is the false god that they worshiped, he was supposed to be the god over the rain and the hail and the snow and the floods and all the things of nature. So basically, in the psyche of the Canaanites, Baal should have protected them because he was in control of all that stuff. But here we see that he had no control over it because he was a false god. And in the psyche of the Canaanites, they were probably scratching their heads, the ones that still had a head to scratch, about what was going on here. Why Baal didn't protect them in this situation, and it shows to them that Baal was powerless against the true and the living God, the God of the Israelites. Comments about that verse?
At one time, since God intervened, that He didn't think that the Israelites were one without God.
Right.
We see, the 300.
Right.
Against thousands.
Right.
They could have won without God's help. With God leading.
Right.
But God He wanted to show these people that He was sovereign over everything.
Right. Right. And let me hold this comment. I might not get through all this. So let's look at verse 12 real quick. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still, thou shalt still upon Gibron, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. So here basically we see that Joshua still had some enemies that needed to be fought. And quite frankly, they were probably running out of daylight. And there's a ton of stuff written about these particular couple verses here. But basically, even the hailstorm did not wipe out everybody. There's still some battle that needs to be fought, and they're running out of daylight. So what Joshua is doing here is he is appealing to God to give me a little bit more daylight so that I can finish the job. And that's basically what he's asking here. So at this particular moment, he is going to call upon God for one more miracle to kind of help him along, which obviously we're going to see here in verse 13 that God made this happen. So let's look at verse 13 real quick because I'm running out of time. It says, and the sun stood still and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is it not this written in the book of Jahar? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and has not to go down about the whole day. So basically, we need to take for granted that however this worked out or however God pulled this off, it was a miracle that was done at the request of Joshua, and it was something that God absolutely had in his power to do. And we need to accept it, for the fact that it's recorded here, and you have an inspired writer, doing this. We also need to consider that God has unlimited power to influence, to change, or suspend anything. And even though he set nature on a course, and the sun rises, the sun sets, all these things go along in God's plan. God was the one who gave the plan. God was the one who gave the law. And God basically is a free agent to do whatever God wants to do. And in this particular case, it doesn't tell us exactly how he did this, but he did it. He did cause the sun to stop. He did cause the moon to stay where it was. That somehow he suspended the way that maybe the earth goes around the sun, or the way that the earth turns on its axis. Whatever he did, It was a miracle that that God did, and He had the power and He had the authority to do this. One of the things that there's a lot of writing about is what time of day did this happen? And if you think about it, if it happened in the middle of the day, you probably wouldn't notice that it was going on. But if it was happening at when the sun starts to go down, I'm sure everybody in here has watched the sun go down or see a sunset. It goes in a deal and it gets darker and darker and darker, and you can see it happen. If this happened at the end of the day and all of a sudden the light just kind of stopped and it wasn't getting any darker, and you sense the fact that, wow, this has been, it's 12 o'clock at night. We're here in Huntington, West Virginia, and normally the sun is still not out at 12 o'clock at night. We would figure that there's something miraculous that's going on. So, the consensus of most of the scholars is that they feel like that this happened at the end of the day, that would give no doubt in anybody's mind that this miracle was happening. And it also gave Joshua the opportunity to finish the job, because back then they didn't do a whole lot of warring at night. It didn't work out very, very good. So we see here the interaction. Joshua made the request of God. God fulfilled the request that Joshua made. And it worked out so that Joshua was able to fulfill the mission that God had given him of completely wiping out the Canaanites. Comments about that? Let's look at verse 14 real quick. It says, "And there was no day like that before or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. And Joshua returned, and all the Israel with him unto the camp." So we see here that God was actually a participant in this particular battle, and it came out good for the children of Israel. We see here that all of his men, he didn't lose one person in this battle. Everybody returned back to the camp. So, based on Joshua's petition in verse 12 and the promise that God made back in verse 8, this was probably a public prayer that he made in the hearing of all the Israelites. They heard him ask God, to do this. So we'll stop right there, and I'll tell Bill he can pick up with verse 16, and he can talk about what happened to the kings next week. So I appreciate everybody's attention and comments.